Hi, Zizaran here with another video about PoE 2, and Havoc has recently posted new footage that we haven't seen before, so I'm going to react, walk through it, and I'm going to pause and talk about it if there's anything new that I haven't seen. And it is a 20-minute video, so I'm going to try not to pause it every 10 seconds, but yeah, I want to react to this real quick. Obviously, we have PoE 2 starting soon on December 6th. Yeah, I'm very confident I'm starting on softcore. Thank you for the sub, Nicholas.
It is important to note this video is primarily based on my March and June playthroughs, meaning that come early access on December 6th, the game most likely will be different, and any feedback given in this video may have already been addressed. On that note, the primary goal of this video is to, of course, provide feedback to GGG, emphasizing gameplay and design elements that stood out to me, but secondarily, for the players and community, I hope I can further the discussion on some recurring topics, especially in regards to combat. Now, with that settled, my opinion on Path of Exile 2 after 12 hours of playtesting is Path of Exile 2 is good, and Path of Exile 2 is its own unique game.
That's good.
If I had to give 3 additional
reasons. Actually, this should be such a, like, off the start, this should be such a nice thing for people to hear because Havoc is such a blaster. So if he enjoys it, that's good. Like, for me, the number one thing I'm basing my excitement on is the fact that Neon enjoys it and Zaki and stuff. And I don't think they would lead me astray. I mean, I think there will be some people that are just biased or jaded and being like, anyone who says it's good is like paid or something, but I don't know. I'm excited. It's also like, I don't really get any benefit from being jaded about PoE 2. I just need to try it more.
Play PoE 2.
The dude leveled to 100 in under an hour. Yeah.
There would be meaningful combat, improved accessibility, and higher intensity
boss The last time I played was the LA event.
The combat versus trash monsters has a mix of both zoom and challenging encounters. Accessibility has been improved.
I see people dying a lot.
Depth, simply by hiding complexity. And endgame level.
I am a little bit worried about that. I do think we're going to be losing depth.
In terms of changes, I'm looking to see improvements to the following systems during early access. The first being mana. As a player, I just don't believe resource sustain is a compelling problem to solve, especially because it feels bad when you can't cast your skills. Secondly, crafting. I believe PoE 2 has an opportunity to bridge the gap in itemization capability between an experienced endgame player and a new player journeying through the game for the first time.
Yeah, the apostrophe.
And third, further development of meaningful combat. Not because there's anything wrong with it, but because it's actually amazing. And I see significant potential for it to get that much better, especially as you get more tools and options to defeat various
I'm gonna die so much.
Now, during this introduction, I will be reviewing my March Ranger playtest, discussing itemization, gearing, and gameplay decisions, overviewing Ranger build archetypes, and in addition to the main run, analyzing how my 2 bonus speedruns went. Furthermore, I'll also be examining and challenging various design choices, such as the disenchant system or meaningful combat, and drawing comparisons between the March and June versions of the game, to hopefully make progress on the following questions. How hard should the game be? And how fast should the game play? I'm curious, by the end of the video...
Am I going to be using a controller? No, controllers are not meant to be used for playing video games.
With my conclusions. If not, I'd love to hear what your opinions are. With that being said, let's get into it. Starting with the March playtest. Immediately after, I was concerned with the scarcity of items and overall just slower paced gameplay. In that version of the game, the best way to speed things up was to slowly collect gold, to eventually gamble for weapons at the vendor, a tiresome but necessary task.
Only LT? However, oh, I'm joking, by the way. I just don't like it.
This concern was addressed, with both item drops and gold feeling more plentiful. The gameplay was also faster, and our characters were much stronger, which of course felt great, but also fair. Fair because if I started playing too aggressively, I would eventually get checked, because both trash monsters and bosses would fight back, which from my perspective allowed the game to create periods of higher paced blasting.
Like, I think for me personally, what I would want the game to be is I don't want mapping to be a challenge. I don't want mapping. I don't really like the idea of super engaging rares or blues or white monsters. I kind of want that to be a walkover. I kind of want that to be Okay, actually, maybe like at the highest tier, but I want to be able, like, I want there to be content that I can be like watching a movie and play and blast. But even map bosses, I'm okay with having to pause my movie for map bosses. I'm okay with focusing for map bosses. I would want every map boss to be similar to like Maven when you're first encountering her, right? I'm okay with every single boss at the end of a map being an actual fight. But I don't want to randomly have to have an encounter in the middle of a map, right? That's my personal opinion. And I want Ubers to be like 4 times harder than current Ubers, right? Like I like challenging content. I like engaging content. And I am open to PoE too. It might be awesome, but that's my current vibe of how I'm thinking. Like I would love to be blasting in maps and then actually doing a proper boss fight. And I hope that there will be different reasons to skip bosses and different reasons to rush bosses, right? I hope. I think the best way to achieve that is having like specific loot. Like some things only drops off bosses, some things only drops off mobs. But anyway.
Was kept in balance by tougher encounters that require strategic gameplay to move onward. This combat dynamic is fundamental to what made my PoE2 playthrough so engaging, which is why I'll be emphasizing and expanding on it throughout the video. But before I do, let's shift gears and get into the main Ranger run. Loading into the riverbank, the first thing I need to talk about is this insane level 1 chest from the Bloated Miller. Life, cold res, and stun threshold are all great stats.
Life regen is actually cracked.
Are actually the 17 energy shield and 2.6 life regen per second.
Yep.
These recovery modifiers significantly reduce the impact of chip damage during both boss fights and trash clear.
Well, like unironically, I'm going to be stacking regen
in town. That being said, recovery stats and professional speedrunning skills are not enough to rush into level 4 zone early. The werewolf prowlers inside the old forest hit a bit too hard for level 2 almost 0 gear character. However, when I returned to the Old Forest later as a level 4 character with just a 17 armor helmet, 22 evasion from this chest, and double the life regen with the Crimson Amulet, the werewolves were significantly more manageable.
So you might have heard that like every single Path of Exile player at the LA playtest was getting fucked, right? Like Ben, Alk, Nugi, me, everyone. We were getting absolutely obliterated. I do think if we had an extra 20 minutes to overlevel, that would probably be fine. So we'll see.
Which underscores the importance of gearing, notably in regards to upgrading item bases during progression and not skimping out on defensive layering. A theme that I found constantly emphasized in both the Ranger and Monk run.
I would say like
now adjacent to gearing
really
is vendoring and the
good.
new disenchant system. In Path of Exile 1, when you vendor an item, you generate transmutation, alteration, or alchemy shards. However, in Path of Exile 2, vendoring an item simply offers gold, and shard generation has been moved to a separate vendor. First question that comes to mind is why? Why create a new system? As a player, this just sounds like one more thing to do every trip to town. But holding off judgment for just a moment.
We're just waiting for steel.
Balance. Currently, disenchanting a magic item provides 1 transmutation shard, and disenchanting a rare provides 1 alchemy shard.
Does it have to be ID?
Magic items for 1 transmutation shard that might not hit isn't exactly the most appealing offer, and finding 20 rares in the first place is a tough ask. In this version of the game, the best way to find upgrades outside of lucky drops was gambling, which meant saving 300 to 600 gold or more per desired item slot, a task that wasn't too difficult since items sold for 10 to 70 gold each. With this level of tuning, the disenchant system was practically irrelevant, offering no alternative for acquiring upgrades. So with that in mind, if the developers wanted players to consider the trade-off between accumulating gold and gambling versus sacrificing gold for orbs and crafting on high-level bases, then the obvious solution is to naturally provide more shards. Which, to be fair, is something they might have already done by enabling higher item level gear to disenchant for more. Still, while the system might be fine, my preference is towards Path of Exile 1's automatic vendor system, simply because it avoids additional town downtime and extra decision making, which ultimately means more time spent fighting monsters. Moving onward, the systems and the quantity of orbs you generate during the campaign directly relate to defensive balance. Currently, if
I hope in-game mapping isn't just farming for gold instead of orbs. Yeah, I actually came around to the idea of gold, and I think it's been a really nice addition to PoE. But I don't want it to be I don't want it to be like overpowering. I want it to be like an addendum. I think it fixes respec and stuff. But
And equipping the appropriate resist jewelry.
yeah,
Regardless
Pyra.
of the affixes on my items, campaign progression feels fair. My potential concern is, if say alchemy orbs are plentiful, we might run into a situation where the balance team deems that well-rolled rare items are required to smoothly progress ahead. And while it's likely that will be the case in later acts or early mapping content, it's worth considering how the amount of necessary gearing impacts the overall campaign experience. Right now, the level of minimum viable gearing in Acts 1 and 2 feels well balanced and enjoyable, especially so in the June iteration of the game. The progression from quest to quest, boss to boss, and zone to zone was challenging, but also fun. There's this constant feeling of forward momentum, which I believe is only possible because of two factors. There was no need to excessively refarm a prior zone, which would have broken immersion, and there was no pressure to overgear for any encounter. So expanding on these two factors, we can take a look at this dynamic in Path of Exile 1. In PoE 1, new players often full clear zones, overleveling and overgearing much more than necessary, whereas experienced players will often take the shortest path through zones, progressing quicker with less gear. For myself, the slow gear playstyle is what makes PoE 1 challenging and fun, and in the same respect is what made my PoE 2 playthrough just as enjoyable. Now on the flip side, the developers can still choose to design challenging encounters while also necessitating an above average amount of gear. However, I have to circle back that if the process of acquiring that gear is not engaging, it may disrupt the flow of gameplay. Which leads me to a new thread, crafting, and raises the following question: how can crafting be engaging, but also accessible, while retaining the depth and complexity that PoE plays?
As an actual PoE 1 player, this is like definitely the most worrying thing for me, because I do love the way crafting is right now in PoE 1.
Desire. Honestly, I don't have the answer to this, because my favorite form of crafting is identifying an item off the ground, potentially adding a craft, and blasting ahead with no downtime. I believe it would be interesting if a player
My Chrysler Savik sound really different in this video. It's his YouTube voice.
Well experienced with endgame crafting, offered their thoughts on how they might implement it. I also wonder to what degree crafting as a system needs to be in the campaign, as the current gameplay loop is quite engaging without it. Perhaps crafting and the scaling of its complexity is best suited for maps, where small periods of downtime already exist. Zooming back out to playstyle, right now in the current PoE 2 balance, you can create a similar experience to PoE 1 by refarming zones and bosses to outgear the content. While in contrast, if you farm each zone and boss once, your character will naturally have less gear, which leaves you with a decision: play slow and safe, or to challenge yourself to blast and survive. And this challenge to survive, while blasting as fast as possible, I believe is what makes Path of Exile 2 unique. Now, I could expand on strategic combat for quite a while, discussing when you can zoom and when you can just jump in and blow stuff up, but for the brevity of this video, I'll pick just one aspect of it, which is dodge roll, and how that leads to another design area with potential room for further improvement. So in this clip, you can see that I'm in the Mud Burrow, a very narrow zone, and as I'm progressing forward, I encounter this big pack with a ton of skeletons. And what's interesting here is that when I dodge roll through them, I shove the skeletons out of the way, which feels good. But immediately after, since mobs are dying slowly, I have to make a decision. I can kite backwards where I know it's safe, or I can push forward into the unknown to progress ahead and get to the zone boss faster. Naturally, as a speedrunner, I chose the latter. Unfortunately though, actions have consequences, and I get surrounded here by hard-hitting mud simulacrum. So to maintain forward progression, I try to dodge roll through the two simulacrum above me, which I can't, leading to my quick demise.
I hate
As an
this.
experienced player, I can recognize that this
I hope it's
fault,
something.
but I suspect for
I hope it's something I will adapt to, but like I hate that. I actually hate it. Phasing is my favorite thing in ARPGs. Like I think getting stuck is my least favorite thing in games. So I hope I'll adapt to it, but I initially hate it.
This might not be so obvious. At the very least, they might feel confused.
But would a movement skill not fix this anyway? Early on, you don't have movement skills. You don't get a movement skill early.
Or even frustrated with either the mechanics or the feel of the game. Now this problem, which I'll define as a lack of agency.
In my opinion, phasing is something you should earn. My solution would be that you could shift dodge roll, and that puts dodge roll on cooldown for 10 seconds, but it lets you do a longer phased dodge roll. That would be my solution.
Is evident in the June update as well, even in wide open zones. Currently, if you pull too large of a pack, you might get swarmed and surrounded, and some might argue that this adds a level of challenge, but I would counter, this challenge is only two-dimensional. Those two dimensions being that you either pull small packs of enemies and take care of them one at a time, or you should just YOLO jump in, button mash, and pray. If you ask me, meaningful combat should offer more than just these two options, involving decision making both before and during the action.
100%, because that's the thing, right? What you end up creating with the phasing thing is that you end up creating that players will just pull very small packs, right? Like there is so much discussion about Laga Macro, right? But Laga Macro ends up creating a fun playstyle. And this is gonna be very different.
Cooked for a moment. What if dodge roll had phasing? Without phasing, aggressive gameplay is punished and slow gameplay is encouraged, removing multiple dimensions of skill expression.
Yeah.
Introducing dodge roll phasing could encourage more aggressive playstyles, allowing players to bite off more than they can chew,
Yeah.
while still having the ability to outplay the situation. Furthermore, it may open up additional design space for the developers to explore. This change alone might reduce the current emphasis on overly cautious gameplay and benefit newer players who might not recognize the need for careful positioning and movement.
Yeah,
All
Linder.
that being said, this might just be a skill issue, because in Acts 2 and onward, we had way more skill gems available. It's entirely possible I already had the tools at my disposal, and I was simply unaware of how to use them. Which is a sentiment echoed by Jonathan Rogers, the game director of Path of Exile 2, who mentioned in a recent interview that you really need to spend time playing a character to fully understand how it works. And without that experience, getting destroyed is a likely outcome.
Yeah.
Changing gears,
So I'm gonna start on
we need to
softcore.
talk about mana, especially when you don't have it. The problem is, when you don't have it, you can't play the game. And that really is the key point. I understand resource management is a tool to balance the game. However, as a player, I've never found it to be a compelling problem to solve. In this clip in the background, you'll notice I've been low on mana for quite a while. And because of the town portal animation, I could not portal out. My only option at the time was to roll away while
So obviously they've changed how flask works. We now have 2 or 3 flasks. Like we have 1 life, 1 mana at least, and then potentially some sort of like utility flask similar to Elden Ring, which also we're gonna play Elden Ring in a sec. I'm just waiting for steel. But I think if PoE gives 1 flask charge every 5 seconds or every 10 seconds, every 10 seconds is fine. It just needs to passively regenerate. I don't care. I would make it so good. Cause like you actually pick that up as a ranger pretty early, and it just made the game like infinitely easier.
While
I
attempting
think
to
that would
lose
just be
aggro the
good
mob,
default
then
behavior.
portal out and refill my flasks. This took over 40 seconds.
It also
which is frankly
encourages slower
frustrating.
players rather than
Now,
faster.
they did update flasks in the June playtest, but it still wasn't enough. That said, this might have only been a monk problem. All of the monk players I spoke to were grumbling about it, with some even specking man nodes on the passage tree and still not solving it. Either way, I'm looking forward to more improvements here in the future. Changing focus from conceptual topics,
Yeah, baking.
let's
I
discuss
agree with
ranger
that.
builds. In this playtest, ranger builds can be sorted into 2 themes, lightning and chaos, with lightning builds being further broken down into 2
Yeah,
variants.
I'm not a big fan. I
The
don't
first
feel like
variant is a
most.
simple combo between lightning rod
I don't
and
feel like
lightning
most things have done resource management well in games.
arrow. Lightning rod shoots an arrow into the sky that remains in the ground for 12 seconds after it lands. This ground embedded arrow then releases AoE lightning bursts every time it's hit by
Magicka
chaining
has a
lightning
fun
beams.
resource management.
Conveniently, lightning arrow fires chaining lightning beams that can chain into the lightning rod arrows, creating multiple lightning burst explosions based on the number of lightning rod arrows previously shot. Now, in this version of the game, most monsters were fairly tanky, so higher damage combos like this
Heavy
were strongly
rising is good.
incentivized. That being said, also in this version of the game, Stormcaller Arrow in combination with Herald of Thunder could recreate one-button gameplay. And what's interesting is, at the time, I considered this a balance issue, because if a one-button build was too strong, it would likely get nerfed. Yet that perception was based on my prior understanding that combo gameplay was the end-all be-all method of achieving meaningful combat. However, after the June playtest, playing a monk and clearing multiple screens in a row with mostly one button, I realized that meaningful combat doesn't necessarily require combo gameplay, it's just one avenue to achieve it. In future versions of the game, I can see a world where one button gameplay still exists, because by shifting the focus away from the player and more onto the monsters, combat can remain both engaging and strategic with the right combination of varied monster packs and enemies that actually fight back. Anyways, I did say I was going to talk about builds, but I just couldn't help myself there. Moving on to the Chaos Ranger build, I end up playing a Poison Dot variant with the 3 skills, Poison Burst Arrow, Toxic Growth, and Vine Arrow. This was a combo build and it worked as so.
Actually, so
Toxic
excited
Burst
to
drops
play.
pods on the ground, which then light up and explode when hit by a Poison Burst Arrow, as long as there's at least one monster above the pod when hit. To attack multiple pods at once, Poison Burst Arrow was linked to multiple projectiles and pierce, and for more damage, Toxic Growth was linked to poison. This combo could chunk bosses, but in comparison to Lightning Rod and Lightning Arrow, it was much more difficult to use, because more focus was required to maximize pod overlap, while also predicting boss movement and avoiding monster one-shot abilities. Now, both builds did benefit from Vine Arrow, which would help by tethering to bosses.
Vine Arrow was what I was using to clear.
But if I was put on the spot and had to choose a build for a new ranger to run, I would pick the Lightning variant for 2 main reasons. The first being that the jump back from Toxic Growth messed with my positioning much more than I would have liked, which I might have been okay with if the pod's conditional is a monster above check had a
I was feeling that too, and I feel like something like that would be nice if it was a toggle. Like, you know how dash has the behavior that you can make dash go backwards in PoE? I think it'd be nice. Like, sometimes I don't want it to move backwards. Like, what if I don't want it to have the movement component?
A larger area in combination with a larger explosion radius. But secondly, instantaneous damage and the ability to attack from afar just feels good. Now transitioning to Speedrun 1, it was a low gear playstyle attempt that selected Escape Shot from the first uncut skill gem, with the goal of using it as a movement skill, and an ambitious secondary goal to clear while moving. The mobility was great when it worked, except when it didn't. It was very easy to use the skill gem and not go anywhere. As for clearing while moving, that was definitely a bit too ambitious, simply because with a starting bow and no extra flat damage on gear, I could not one-shot monster packs in this version of the game. Still, the ability to freeze monsters was useful, and conceptually, having tools like this to deal with swarms of enemies is something I can appreciate and agree with. Progressing ahead, since this was my second character, I was able to find the Mud Barrow and subsequently the Devourer rather quickly. However, the fight itself was quite difficult. No life regen, 2 life flasks,
Life regen is so big in PoE too.
Of attrition, aka just don't get hit. But what if I could freeze the boss? In PoE 2, the chance to apply ailments is based on the magnitude of the damage done, which I believe we can visually see by looking at any individual ailment box. So in theory, if I hit 3 to 4 escape shots, I could have frozen the boss. Yet, it wasn't worth it, because it was too easy to get stunned, and since I didn't have any combos at this point, I couldn't take advantage of the fact that the boss wasn't moving. Furthermore, even if the boss was moving, I could for the most part still maximize my damage uptime with WASD and attack
2 Souls-like.
Now I have to note, after
bosses will
the fight,
definitely be more Soulsy.
Was a skill issue. If we watch the footage closely, we can see the Devourer's arm winding up, telegraphing the ability, meaning I could have dodge rolled first and then used escape shot for a potential freeze. Still, how did the overall fight go? Well, as I said earlier, it was a battle of just don't get hit, which I was pretty good at, except for when this happened. Alright, round 2. Let's try that again. Just don't get hit.
It's hard. I actually did see game journalists quit and give up at this fight.
Anyways, escaping to Speedrun 2, we had some interesting drops, notably this Iron Ring and Fire Arrow Quiver. Just like PoE 1, flat damage is incredibly important for attack-based builds, and in PoE 2 is no different, with these two items almost doubling my damage.
Does the dodge roll have iframes? Yes. It has iframes against projectiles, not against AoE, so a boss slam can still hit you, but you can iframe like a bow hit.
A zone overrun with swift striking werewolves, whose swarming nature had previously forced me to retreat during the main run. But with my newfound damage, I can now 2 to 3 shot normal monsters instead of the prior 4 to 6, meaning I could play much more aggressively, dodge rolling through packs to clear as fast as possible. However, at the end of the zone, I encountered this evasive werewolf pack, which would not fall over quickly, forcing me to play at range, which introduced a new problem, because there's a second, much larger type of werewolf, which when playing at range, instead of simply chasing and swiping at you, like most wolves, would actually leap swipe instead, doing considerably more damage, with this one wolf repeating it 5 times in a row. Now zooming out slightly, without Iron Rings, Fire Arrow Quivers, or even an insane weapon, the level of clear speed experienced in Speedrun 2, especially so in the first 2 zones, or as a monk in the June update, is the default balance baseline I desire. However, the more I review the footage, the more apparent it becomes that I could have been blasting in the March version of the game if I was more readily using my combos and was more knowledgeable in regards to monster AI and monster abilities. Which makes me circle back to Jonathan's statement that you need to spend some time playing a character to really understand how it works, and now I believe the sentiment also applies to monsters. Said differently, Path of Exile 1 is the player's world. You become a screen-clearing powerhouse, and the game becomes an arcade blasting experience. Whereas Path of Exile 2 is the monster's world. We're just living in it. Looping back to the introduction, I posed 2 questions. How hard should the game be, and how fast should the game play? And in review of the discussion so far, I've mostly discussed pacing and lightly discussed challenge, a subset of what hard is. Which is the big question. What does hard even mean? I've been trying to find an answer for quite a while, but defining hard is hard, because everyone has their own definition of hard. That's
very well made video.
Myself, hard is the challenge, and when I look at my most challenging moments, they are also my most memorable. So to attempt to answer the question, I believe the game should not be easy, rather it should be difficult. Because if it's too easy, there's no sense of accomplishment, and the experience might become forgettable. Whereas if the game is hard, and tuned appropriately, the challenges can be both aspirational and memorable. I hope I don't beat endgame bosses on my first try. I hope I really have to struggle with some of them. I hope that there are pinnacle bosses that are so hard that if beaten, can provide a huge sense of achievement.
I agree.
And knowing the developers, I believe this is what we can expect. Now, moving on to pacing, the more I think about it,
It's
the more
important
I
to realize that not everybody wants the game to be hard. I kind of want both. I really want both. I want like mapping to be relatively easy and bosses to be hard. That'd be my dream world.
Doesn't actually matter. What matters is the level of engagement, the flow of combat.
True, you do still have PoE 1, you're right.
The puzzles I solve along the way, not how fast I clear a map. 20 seconds versus 20 minutes, it doesn't matter. What matters is if I'm having fun. And based on my experience so far, PoE 2 delivers.
That's good.
That said, the actual experience is more meaningful than anything I can say. Whether or not it jives with you, that's for you to decide. Anyways, early access should be here on December 6th, and if you can't already tell, even with my reservations, I'm on the hype train. New game, new builds, new monsters, new everything. If you want more footage, you can check out my June playthrough here, and my Ranger boss footage here. Lastly, GGG is live streaming everything you need to know about Path of Exile 2 on November 21st. So until then, thanks for watching, and as always, have a great day, Exiles. Bye.
Yeah, true. Based. I'm definitely gonna watch that. I'm very excited. Yeah, there's hype in general. I'm a lot more excited for the game than I initially was. Like at ExileCon, I was very not hype. I'll link the video in the chats. But either way, huge, really good video by Havoc. Really well structured. I like his YouTube voice. And yeah, no, I'm just very excited. Hopefully it'll be a banger. I mean, like I said, I have confidence. Like the people that are working there and making it have not led me astray so far. Either way, hope you guys enjoy the react. I'm very hyped, and I hope you are too. And yeah, thanks for watching. So if you liked the video, make sure you check out Havoc. Great artist. And yeah, try to die. Less than we are all going to do in PoE 2.